Mhm. Hello, my name is Monse Arevalo, and I am doing my presentation on violence against Indigenous women. So some general info about this topic is that in 2016, around 80% of Indigenous women experience violence in their lifetime, and more than half of their experiences are sexual violence as well. Native American and Alaskan Native women have the second highest homicide rates, with homicide being the 10th leading in the top 10 leading causes of death for Indigenous women. And Indigenous individuals are more likely to be living in poverty, with also Indigenous individuals being ranked highest for prison inmates, illiteracy, and unemployment. So some of the different types of violence that were slightly mentioned in the general info that they experience is sexual violence, physical violence, and they also experience a lot of human trafficking. And most of the victims are Native American natives and Alaskan Native women between the ages of 1 and 45. So a lot of their victimization happens from a young age, whether it be physical or sexual, it happens at a young age. And then if they're put into human trafficking, that's something they experience for a longer period of time. So one of the theories I'm going to be discussing in my presentation is differential association theory. It was introduced in the late 1930s with the main topic being that criminal values can be culturally transmitted by significant others or other individuals. It doesn't have to be just the significant others. Um, the original theoretical model has 9 principles, with all of them boiling down to the main idea of that criminal behavior is learned. So it's one of the first theories that doesn't have the idea of born criminals, because a lot of the theories before that that were prior to 1930s was that criminal behavior is genetic, that it is um, a genetic disposition that is passed down. And there were a lot of theories where the indentations of the skull indicate, like in certain features, indicate whether a person is a criminal or not a criminal, which has a lot of racial connotations. So this theory is more focused on like social norms and what is acceptable in their societies. It believes that the more info a person got about crime, the more likely they were to commit a crime if they learned it was good or they could benefit. So back to not being born criminals, but it being a learned behavior, where if they have an elder in their community that is showing them that they can get away with being abusive, with taking advantage of other people, with being physical with other people, without a lot of consequences or anything bad happening to them, or that it's some sort of release, they'll be more likely to pick that behavior up and do it for a long term, like life expectancy, or do it more often. The second theory that I'll be focusing on is going to be Tittle's control balance theory. This theory is more recent. It was presented in 1995. Claims a person is less likely to offend than the individual when the individual has a good balance of being controlled and being in control, with the focus of control deficits and control surpluses being the reason why a person falls into crime. So control deficits would be if they're being told what to do more often, if they have a lot of like restrictions on what they're able to do, and then control surpluses being that they have no regulation, they're able to get away with whatever they want with no consequences or anything. So violence against Indigenous women and differential association theory. So the way that they're connected is the social norms and born criminal idea. So in Indigenous cultures, because all the communities are very like I don't want to say small, but they are more concentrated to mostly Indigenous people, with a lot of their lands being protected through the government in a way, so that only Indigenous individuals can live on those lands. If in that culture that they are living in, abuse is a very prevalent thing that happens, where maybe their moms were abused, their sisters were abused. If you're a young man or a younger individual in those cultures, you believe that it's a very normal thing. So you're not able to see what is acceptable and what's acceptable outside of that culture. There is also a lack of education and engagement with others outside their community. So if they're not leaving their land to go out to a normal city or anything, since they're not getting that exposure to different cultures and communities and what's okay and like what is their social norms, they're more likely to not see anything wrong with what they're doing. So if they are abusive to someone that is in their community, it's more acceptable. And if they were to be in a relationship or a partnership with someone outside their community and they expressed some abusive tendencies that they might normally express in their communities back home, they'll be shown more displeasure. A lot of people will show that, oh, that's not acceptable. You can't be doing that at all. Um, a lot of Indigenous people also face discrimination in many aspects, such as healthcare, the respect of their land, and their right to choose their own government. So, because it's a government sanctioned, they have their own form of government and what's acceptable legally in their lands. Um, a lot of Indigenous women also face a lot of um, discrimination in healthcare, which affects it in a way where if they're pregnant or if they're experiencing any issues with their health, they're less likely to be taken seriously. There are more issues with pregnancies and birth. Like a lot of women, Indigenous women, are more likely to pass away during childbirth, and they have more issues with childbirth because they're not taken as seriously. With the respect of their land, um, it's a lot of people are trespassing. They are being driven off their land. So it's like if they're not in control, if they're being shown that they don't have to be respected, they might believe that, oh, like since we're not being respected for the stuff that we believe is ours, we don't have to respect the things that are on our land or the people that are on our land whenever they make us upset. It's an outlet for them to release their aggression in a different way. With violence against Indigenous women and control balance theory. Um, it kind of ties in with the lack of control of what's happening with their land, government, and healthcare. So the trespassing lands and being pushed off due to natural resources on their lands, they don't have control over who comes in and who comes out. Yes, there aren't people that are supposed to be coming into their lands, but they can't control whether or not people will follow those regulations. And there are also people that are like killing indigenous people because the resources on their land and they're not selling their land so that those people can gain those resources. So that's a lack of control that they don't have, which would build up aggression and that they want to release. With healthcare, um, they're more likely to be discriminated against when seeking medical attention and do not get equal treatment when they are pregnant or giving birth. A lot of women don't receive the proper prenatals and postnatal vitamins that they need when they're um, pregnant. That's not something that's in their control. They don't have a lot of access to healthcare as well. And it's also like a lack of education because a lot of Indigenous people deal with many medical issues that also includes like STIs, and how to properly treat and like live with them as well. And then due to protection on their land, they do not get the same opportunities to choose their government or political system. Since they are government sanctioned, they don't have as much access, like they are American citizens as well, since they were on the land before, or they're considered indigenous, so they have those rights, but they're not as able to exercise those rights because of their indigenous status with the land. So all of these aspects is not it's not a control surplus, it's that they're experiencing a control deficit. So some policy implications that I was looking into is that more educational support and programs specialized for indigenous individuals. So a lot of things that we talk about in non-indigenous societies is adding more educational support. So that way, like after school programs that may be beneficial for people that like don't have a place to go home to after. If there's more like after school programs and more people that are, whether they're outside of the community or inside the community with the proper background checking and everything, it be good to have different role models in their setting so that way they're able to see what is okay, like what the social norms are outside of their land. And that might, if we're focusing on like the learned behaviors, they'll be more likely to not commit those crimes because they're learning that what they're doing is not acceptable outside of their land. So it's not a good habit to build. More accessible healthcare with routine mental health counseling screen and mental health or counseling screening to identify signs of abuse for all ages. So if they have like the yearly check-ins that most individuals do, if we make healthcare more accessible, um, there's usually a healthcare or a mental health and counseling screening that is done every yearly check-in to see if the individual is facing any abuse or if there's any sign of depression, anxiety, ADHD, or anything that may be impacting their lives. If there is specifically one for abuse or like any signs of abuse that may be happening, whether it be physical, mental, or like any signs of child like human trafficking or anything like that. Um, so that way it's a more open areas that women can talk about the issues that they're experiencing if they are being physically abused or if they're facing any violence in their community. And then restorative justice practices in schools that have high populations of indigenous youth. Oftentimes restorative justice schools, it's a very slow process. It's better they start it younger, but it teaches them how to work as a community in a positive way. It keeps in check the individuals who are more likely to fall into offender like behaviors, which whether it be more criminal behaviors or anything like that. And then reparation. So that way it helps individuals that are victims or anything like that discuss what they're feeling and then also like lets them shine a light. So if we're able to teach everyone how they should be treated outside of the abuse they might face in their smaller communities, if they have the restorative practices, they'll learn at a younger age, like that violence isn't the answer, and things like that. Yeah. So some discussion questions that could come up for that could be asked for my topic is how would restorative justice practices be beneficial for violence against Indigenous women? I believe it would be beneficial because restorative justice teaches individuals how to um, a better way to socially and emotionally like deal with their issues, whatever they have going on. Um, because they use more communication techniques that would be more beneficial outside of educational settings that they could use at home. If they start it young, if they get it into the newer generations, or they start it for the later generations, if they're still in educational settings, it could teach them how to properly communicate their emotions so that way communities with high populations of indigenous individuals, primarily for the indigenous women, they won't be facing as much violence because people will be more able to discuss what is going on and how to avoid and like how to communicate if they are dealing with any violence because there's a safe space for them to discuss that. How does living in poverty play into the abuse and violence that Indigenous women experience? So I believe that living in poverty plays into abuse and violence that Indigenous women face because areas with a lot of poverty don't get as much government resources, and a lot of those lands, since they are government protected, they don't have a lot of government resources that they can utilize that may be close to them. Um, so I believe that like if they don't have those resources, they won't have it as close to them or as accessible to them. So any counseling that they may be receiving because of the resources that the government provides, um, it'd be harder for them to get access to them. And it's also if they have to pay for those resources, they may not be as willing to put funding into that when there is a need, when there are different needs such as food or paying their like dues, whether it be water or whatever needs to be paid when they are living on protected land. And does discrimination play a significant role in the violence that Indigenous women face? I do believe that discrimination plays a significant role in the violence that Indigenous women face. Um, because I mean, it has an impact. Like we have seen that there is an impact for African American women and individuals that are of different race. So um, if it's impacting them in different ways, whether that be in their work and in healthcare, it would be an impact with the violence that they experience. And especially since in the beginning in 2016, there was a very high rate of Indigenous women that were facing abuse and like sexual violence and human trafficking. And with a lot of, I believe it was 80% of women, of Indigenous women faced some sort of violence, with half of them experiencing sexual violence. Um, and then these are the references I used.